So the other day after the gig, I posted this picture of my drum set to the Gig Pictures thread on Drummer World forums. It wasn't too long until somebody said, "Hey, nice. What's that electronic device to your left?" That, my friends, is my personal mixer, running my in-ear monitor mix. I've used in-ears exclusively for over a decade now. And today I'm going to show you how to put together an inexpensive in-ear rig, how I use my in-ear rig, and why I'll never gig without in-ears again. Welcome to Al's Drum Hang. In-ear monitors make a lot of sense if you think about it. As a drummer, you've got two really important yet logistically exclusive auditory tasks in front of you. Number one is you have to protect your hearing. And for a lot of us, that means earplugs or earmuffs of some kind. But then you also have to hear everything that you need to hear in order to musically interact with the rest of your band. For many of us, that means open air wedge monitors pointed at our ears, but then they have to be turned up extremely loud so we can hear them through the earplugs or hearing protection. Those monitors are competing with the sound coming off of our drum kit and all the rest of the stage sound, amplifiers, other people's monitors. So it can be really challenging to hear what you need to hear. And you may end up overplaying your drums in order to be heard and damaging your hearing at the same time. I find it's almost impossible to pick out the bass guitar using an open air wedge, but that's the thing I need to hear the most in most band situations. So what do? About 15 years ago, I had the experience of playing in a church where the drum set was completely enclosed in one of those plexiglass and acoustic panel shields. There was no wedge monitor at all inside that thing, just one of these. Just an in-ear monitor box. This gave me control over every instrument on stage, including the drum mix. At first, I felt very similar to many of you. I'm really isolated. I'm cut off from the rest of the band. How will I be able to hear everything? But then after a couple of weekends playing with this, a strange thing occurred. I realized I could hear everything I needed to. If I couldn't hear something, I could turn it up. And I could turn the entire mix down. And I wasn't going to be wrecking my hearing. I found that this actually improved my touch. I didn't need to wail on the drums in order to understand where they were in the mix. As a result, my touch improved, and people started commenting on how well my playing complemented the overall volume of the band. I'm not going to go into too much of the science and theory as to why IEMs are just way better for everybody. I think the best discussion of why this is so is in this video from Adam Neely. You can check it out at the link in the description. But I will say this, if you go IEM, you'll probably never go back. The system that church was using 15 years ago was an Aviom Mix 6Y, driving a number of A16 personal consoles. This is very primitive by today's standards, but back then this was like really space age, and also really unaffordable for most working musicians. So when I started gigging out more on my own, I wanted an in-ear monitor situation, but I realized that I'd have to really buy smart in order to have the same effect, but on my budget. 15 years later, I'm actually using most of the same gear I bought initially. So it was wise investment on my part. The first thing I needed to get were some quality yet inexpensive actual in-ear monitors. And like many musicians starting out on this journey, I gravitated towards the Shure SE15s. Big mistake. They sounded muddy, they weren't all that comfortable, and within 6 months, one of the earpieces stopped working. So I sent it back on warranty, got another pair. Second mistake. Within 6 months, the same thing had happened to them. So I got my money back and made a very smart purchase. These are my MEE Audio M6 Pros. They cost half of what the SE215s do. but they're easily 10 times better. These are the same ones I've had for 11 years. All I've done to them is I've upgraded to comply tips, and these are replaceable, and I've upgraded the cable ones. But the actual drivers are the same ones I've had for 11 years. These things are almost indestructible. They're like a tank. I highly recommend the M6 Pros to anybody who's stepping out into the world of IEMs. There's way better on the market with more drivers, even custom ear molds, better fits, better isolation. But for the majority of working musicians, these do just fine. And I've never really felt a burning need to upgrade from them in 11 years. Now you need something to plug these things into, and there's a whole bunch of options. Starting at the very cheap end, you could get something like this Behringer PM1 that clips right on your belt and takes an XLR aux in. It's about 30 bucks, really cheap, really easy to use. I use this occasionally. This is just a little personal headphone amp. It's actually powered, so it gives me a little bit more preamp into my earphones, and it has 4 outputs if I wanted to do more headphones, and this costs about the same, $30. However, what I actually usually use is a compact powered mixer. This is my Yamaha compact mixer. It's an MG102C that I bought about 12 years ago, and it's the same one. I've never upgraded or even had it repaired. Another piece of tank equipment. This mixer has 4 XLRs in and a whole bunch of 1/4-inch ins for guitar or instrument cables. It also has active EQ, 3-band, and compression on the top 2 channels. This is all super helpful. It allows me to put an XLR or a 1/4-inch in, usually to channel 1, which is where I get my major mix from the main board. And obviously I can EQ that, I can compress it, I can adjust the gain and the volume. Super helpful. Because it's a mixer and it has a whole bunch of ins, I can also in some situations plug in other stuff. There's this one bar that we play in often where the only thing in the house PA is the vocals. Everything else is just through the amps, and they're not mic'd. So a lot of times I'll run direct ins from those amps to some of the other channels. I might also throw a microphone underneath the bass drum or near the drum set so that I can hear myself and not overplay. I also have lines in over here in case I need to run a click or my phone or something else into to be heard. I use this while I'm practicing all the time. The other great thing about having an actual compact mixer in my bag is that sometimes that's come in real handy when another piece of gear has gone kablooey on the gig and I actually need to use this as the main mixer. Is it ideal? No, but it works. And then I've got this thing for my personal mix off of that. So it actually can work out both ways. If all the instruments are going into the PA, I'll work with the sound engineer to work on what I need to hear. My default ask is to give me a lot of bass drum because I love to hear that. It helps me click in with the bass. I'll get some snare drum. Obviously, the next most important thing is the bass drum, the guitars. I also need to hear anything that's going to have a solo, start off or end a song, keyboard, saxophone, what have you, and just enough vocals so that I can hear them, but they're not overpowering, and I know where we're at in the song. It sounds like a balancing act, but just like with a wedge speaker, it's just something you work through and find out for yourself what you like best. In the very best of all possible worlds, we're using some sort of mixer for a main board that can be controlled by a tablet or my phone. This way I can tweak stuff as we go and adjust my mix so that it's perfect for me. Used to be the mixers that did this were like hella expensive. We're talking like the ubiquitous Behringer X32 that as of this video is still upwards of $1,500. But then if you look at their X16, it's getting a little bit more reasonable. You can have one of those for under $700. Or then maybe you can look at the Soundcraft line. A UI12 is about $400, and then a UI16 with 16 inputs is somewhere around $575. These are all pretty doable for a band on a budget. But then maybe we're talking about limited inputs from the drum set to the board. So what I often do is I'll submix on a local device sitting next to the drum set, send just a couple of feeds to the main board so I'm not taking up 8 or 10 channels on a compact board. This is an old Tascam interface that I got used for $40. And I've used it a lot of times here on this channel just to record drums. But I also take it along on gigs, put 8 mics into it, and then send 2 sends to the main board just so that they have my feed. And then I can also run an out from the headphones. Actually, they're over here. I can run an out from the headphones back to my personal mixer and have a little bit of a boost of the drum mix myself. Just little tips, little tricks I do. And so that's a pretty inexpensive bunch of gear. Maybe $50 for the IEMs, talking $100 for that mixer when I bought it, maybe $20, $30 of cables, and I bought this used for $40. So I'm in under $200 roundabout for an IEM rig that works for me. Often I get asked why I bother. Why do I bother with this? I'm out in the sticks in central Washington where most sound guys are used to people just using wedges, and all the drummers are deaf, and if you ask for an in-ear mix and an XLR aux send, they look at you like a pig with look at a wristwatch. What do you mean? Why aren't you happy going deaf like everybody else? But that makes sound volume on stage really dangerously loud as everybody competes with their instruments and their wedges to hear what they need to hear, and there's just so much sound and mics start feeding back, which everybody loves. On most gigs, I don't struggle with that. I'm insulated, I don't have an ear-splitting amount of volume going in, and I can hear exactly what I need to hear, and it can be tweaked incrementally. I can lock in with the other instruments very easily. I hear what I need to hear, and it just makes it so much more enjoyable to be musical. I'm not isolated from the other musicians. I'm maybe hearing them better than they can hear themselves. And at the end of the night, I can take out my IEMs and I can hear. I'm not deaf. My ears aren't ringing. It's actually kind of enjoyable. When people say they don't like in-ears, I get it. It feels isolating, it feels weird, everything's right there in your ears, and you don't have the pressure of the sound waves just washing over you, and that feels like rock and roll, right? The loudness and just the visceral feeling of all that volume on stage. It's doing permanent damage to your ears and everybody's ears on stage. I don't think it's worth it. You could be performing so much better if you didn't have to struggle to hear what you needed to hear, struggle to hear yourself, and you could set everything perfectly in your ears. Most of the time I think when people say, I don't like in-ears, well, it's because they haven't taken the time to really work with the mix and the volume and get something that works for them. They are maybe going with like some really cheap earbuds, like from their phone or something, that don't isolate. It's not comfortable. They still can't hear over the stage volume because it's not actually isolating. They haven't worked with the mix, so they can't hear what they need to hear, and they give up quickly. Me personally, I've had a couple of experiences where the sound engineer has struggled to give me what I need, and it's not always enjoyable to try and work through that situation. But I keep the IEMs in because I value my hearing. And of course, those cases are so few and far between. Usually, if the sound engineer knows how to give you a good mix in a wedge, he can give you an excellent mix in your in-ears. If you just spend some time learning what sounds best in your in-ears and just tweaking with the volume and tweaking with the settings and tweaking with instruments in your mix, you'll be able to quickly replicate it from show to show, and you'll soon be on your way to playing your best. So there you have it, some really inexpensive, easy ways to set up an in-ear rig for yourself that you can take to almost any show and just plug in and play. Drop your comments in chat. What gear do you have? What works for you? What questions do you have? What experiences do you have? Let me know. As always, I appreciate your likes, your subscribes. Don't forget to activate your notifications, And I'll see you next time here on Al's Drum Hang. Take care.